The faded Polaroid in my hand seems to grow heavier with each passing second. 6 children, all dressed in their Sunday best, stand in front of the old Vance family home in Sablewood Hollow. Their faces are frozen in time, some smiling, others solemn, as if they already knew what fate had in store for them. I'm the only one who remains. My name is Ilara Vance, and I'm the last of my line. I turned 32 last month, which is something of a miracle in my family. You see, for over a century, the children of the Vance family have vanished without a trace before their 10th birthday. All except for me. I've spent my life haunted by the ghosts of siblings I barely remember and cousins I never met. Their disappearances span decades, each one as inexplicable as the last. No bodies, no evidence, no closure, just empty beds and grieving parents and whispers of a curse that refuses to die. For years, I've kept silent about what happened, about what I know. But the nightmares have returned, and with them, the feeling that something is watching me from the shadows. I can't outrun this anymore. Perhaps by telling my story, I can finally break the chains that have bound my family for generations. This is not a ghost story. This is something far worse. This is the truth about the Vance family and why I'm the only child who survived. Sound effect, old tape recorder clicking on. The story begins, as most tragedies do, with an act of greed. In 1889, my great-great-grandfather, Alistair Vance, came to Sablewood Hollow seeking his fortune. The remote Pacific Northwest logging town was unremarkable in most respects, but it sat at the edge of dense woodlands, rumored to be rich with untapped resources. Alistair was a businessman with a reputation for getting what he wanted, regardless of who stood in his way. The locals warned him about the forest. They spoke of ancient treaties with those who dwell beyond the stone circle, and of boundaries that should never be crossed. But Alistair dismissed their superstitions as the ramblings of simple country folk. He purchased 300 acres of woodland and began clearing the trees, intent on building a lumber empire. The first disappearance occurred just weeks after the first axe bit into the old-growth forest. Alistair's 5-year-old son Samuel vanished from his bed one autumn night. The entire town searched for days, but not a single trace of the boy was ever found. Some claim to have heard strange, high-pitched whistling from the woods the night he disappeared, but such accounts were dismissed by the authorities. Grief-stricken but undeterred, Alistair continued his business ventures. His wife gave birth to 3 more children in the years that followed. By some cruel twist of fate, each child vanished before their 10th birthday. Always at night, always without witness, always without a trace. The pattern had begun. You might be wondering why I'm telling you all this. I say to the camera, setting down the leather-bound journal that contains our family history. Why dredge up a century of tragedy? Because the disappearances never stopped. They continued with each new generation of the Vance family. My grandparents lost 2 children. My parents lost 3, and I lost everyone I loved. I closed my eyes, remembering their faces. Leo, the oldest, who taught me how to ride a bike. Clara, who could spend hours creating elaborate stories with her dolls. And little Arthur, named after our infamous ancestor, who never made it past his 4th birthday. Leo was the first to go. I continue, my voice barely steady. He was 9 years old, just a few months shy of his 10th birthday. I was only 4 at the time, But some memories burn themselves into your mind, no matter how young you are. It was a warm June evening in 1995. Our parents had taken us for ice cream after dinner, a rare treat that had left us sticky-fingered and giggling. Leo and I shared a bedroom then, with twin beds on opposite walls. I remember him telling me to stop kicking my feet against the mattress as we settled in for the night. "Go to sleep, Alara," he had mumbled, already half dreaming. Those were the last words he ever spoke. I woke sometime in the night to a strange sound, like wind chimes made of bone, delicate and discordant. Through half-lidded eyes, I saw that Leo's bed was bathed in an odd greenish light that seemed to seep in through the window. I thought I was dreaming, as I watched dark, spindly shapes move about his bed. They weren't quite human, these figures. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Leo never screamed, never called out. He simply rose from his bed, eyes wide but unseeing, and walked toward the window. I tried to call his name, but my voice caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as if some invisible force held me in place. The window opened on its own, though there was no breeze. Leo climbed out, following the twisted shadows. The last thing I saw was his pajama-clad form, silhouetted against that sickly green light, before he vanished into the darkness. When I finally found my voice and screamed for my parents, Leo was already gone. The police searched for weeks. They dragged the nearby lake, combed the woods with cadaver dogs, questioned every resident in town. Nothing. It was as if Leo had simply ceased to exist. My parents were devastated, but resolved to keep our family together. "Lightning doesn't strike twice," my father would say, though his eyes held a fear he couldn't hide. He was wrong, of course. 2 years later, Clara disappeared. She was 7, a bright-eyed girl with wild curls and an even wilder imagination. After Leo vanished, my parents had installed state-of-the-art security systems, motion sensors, window alarms, even a guard dog named Max. None of it mattered. On the night Clara disappeared, every electronic device in our house failed simultaneously. The security system, the phones, even battery-operated flashlights, all dead. And Max, our loyal German shepherd, was found cowering in the laundry room, whimpering and inconsolable. I shared a room with Clara after Leo was gone. I remember waking to that same bone chime sound, that same greenish light. This time, I forced myself to sit up, to fight against the paralysis that threatened to overtake me. "Clara," I whispered urgently. "Clara, wake up!" But she was already standing beside her bed, swaying slightly as if in a trance. The shadows gathered around her, their elongated fingers gently brushing her hair. I caught glimpses of their faces, if you could call them faces. They had no eyes that I could see, just deep, hollow indentations where eyes should be, and thin, lipless mouths that stretched too wide across their features. "Don't go with them!" I cried out, finally breaking free of my paralysis. I lunged for my sister, but an invisible barrier stopped me, like hitting a wall of ice-cold glass. Clara turned toward me, and for a brief moment, recognition flickered in her eyes. "They say I have to go, Alara," she said, her voice oddly calm. "They've been calling me for a long time." "Who? Who's calling you?" I demanded, pounding against the invisible barrier. But Clara only smiled, a serene expression that didn't belong on a child's face. "The Whistlers. They live in the in-between places. They've always been there, watching us." Then she turned and walked toward the window, which opened soundlessly to receive her. The shadowy figures enveloped her, and together they faded into the night. By the time my parents reached our room, responding to my screams, Clara was gone. The window was locked from the inside. The alarms, when power returned an hour later, showed no signs of having been triggered. My parents moved us after that. We left Sablewood Hollow and the ancestral Vance home behind, relocating to a suburban neighborhood 3 states away. They changed our last name. They cut ties with the remaining family members. They did everything they could to outrun the curse. It found us anyway. Arthur Jr. was born 2 years after we moved. My parents were hesitant to have another child, but the doctors had told my mother that Clara would likely be her last chance at pregnancy. Arthur was an unexpected blessing and ultimately another victim. He was the sweetest of us all, with dimpled cheeks and a laugh that could brighten the darkest room. I was 9 when he was born, old enough to help care for him, to become his protector. I took that role seriously, especially as he approached his 4th birthday. I had begun to understand the pattern by then, to recognize the danger that loomed over our family. I insisted on sleeping in Arthur's room. I researched protective symbols and lined his windowsill with salt, iron nails, and other wards I'd read about. I kept a journal of any unusual occurrences, cold spots, electronic glitches, strange sounds in the night. I was determined that what happened to Leo and Clara would not happen to Arthur. For 3 years and 11 months, my vigilance seemed to work. Arthur remained safe, growing into a curious, vibrant little boy who loved dinosaurs and could spend hours building elaborate structures with his blocks. 3 weeks before his 4th birthday, I fell ill with a severe case of pneumonia. After 2 days of trying to care for me at home, my parents admitted me to the hospital. I begged them not to leave Arthur, tried to explain about the curse, about what I'd seen take Leo and Clara. They attributed my ravings to the high fever and assured me that Arthur would be fine. I spent 5 days in that hospital bed, consumed with dread. When my parents finally came to take me home, I knew from their hollow eyes and ashen faces what had happened before they said a word. Arthur had vanished from his bedroom 3 nights earlier. The doors were locked, the windows secured. The new security cameras my father had installed showed nothing, just static for 3 crucial minutes in the middle of the night. When the image cleared, Arthur's bed was empty. I'm not telling you this to sensationalize my family's tragedy. I say to the camera, wiping away tears I hadn't realized were falling. I'm telling you because I need to understand why I was spared. Why, out of all the Vance children across 5 generations, am I the only one who lived past my 10th birthday? I take a deep breath, steadying myself before continuing. After Arthur disappeared, something in my parents broke. My mother took her own life 6 months later. My father turned to alcohol, becoming a shell of the man he once was. He died in a single car accident when I was 16, though I've always wondered if it was really an accident at all. I became a ward of the state, bouncing between foster homes until I aged out of the system. I put myself through college, built a career, created a life that looked normal from the outside. But inside, the questions never stopped. The nightmares never faded. Why was I different? What made me special? Or was it just that my time hadn't come yet? I spent years researching my family's history. I tell the viewers, pulling out a stack of documents, birth certificates, death records, newspaper clippings about the disappearances. I traced the pattern back through the decades, looking for exceptions, for clues, for anything that might explain what happened. The pattern was consistent, but not without variations. Some generations lost all their children. Others lost only some. In a few cases, children disappeared as young as 2. In others, they vanished just days before their 10th birthday, as if something was toying with the family's hopes. One detail stood out. In each generation, the disappearances began after a child had seen or experienced something in the woods behind the original Vance property. Leo had gone mushroom hunting with our father a week before he vanished. Clara had claimed to hear singing from the trees while playing in our backyard. And though we'd moved away from Sablewood Hollow before Arthur was born, my parents had taken us back to visit my grandmother when Arthur was 3. He had wandered off during a family picnic, only to be found 20 minutes later at the edge of those woods, talking animatedly to someone no one else could see. There's something in those woods, I say, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. Something that's been watching my family for generations, something that takes the children who can see it. Which brought me to the question that had haunted me for decades. Had I never seen it? Or had it never seen me? 2 months ago, I received a letter from a law firm in Sablewood Hollow. My great-aunt, Agnes, the last Vance to live in the ancestral home, had passed away at the age of 94. To my surprise, she had left everything to me. The house, the property, and what remained of the family fortune. I hadn't known Agnes well. She was something of a recluse, a childless widow who had outlived all her siblings. After I was orphaned, she had sent birthday cards with modest checks, but we'd never spoken directly. Now I wondered if her bequest was more than mere generosity, if perhaps she had known something about our family's curse that she wanted me to discover. I decided to return to Sablewood Hollow. I explained to the place where it all began. If I was ever going to understand what happened to my siblings, to all the Vance children, I needed to confront our history directly. The Vance house stood at the end of a winding driveway, partially hidden by ancient oak trees. It was a Victorian monstrosity, 3 stories of weathered gray stone with a slate roof and too many windows, like a multitude of watchful eyes. It had been well maintained despite its age, a testament to Agnes's care, or perhaps to something more unsettling, as if the house itself wanted to endure. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early October. The real estate agent who handed over the keys seemed eager to leave, mentioning something about meeting another client. As his car disappeared down the driveway, I stood alone for my inheritance, feeling the weight of generations pressing down upon me. The interior was exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits. Dark wood paneling, ornate crown molding, antique furniture draped with white sheets like ghosts frozen in time. The air smelled of furniture polish and old books, with an underlying scent I couldn't quite identify. Something earthy and ancient. I spent that first day exploring, reacquainting myself with the house's labyrinthine layout. The library, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the conservatory, its windows clouded with dust but still allowing dappled light to illuminate the dead plants within. The formal dining room where generations of Vances had gathered for meals, unaware of the fate awaiting their children. As twilight fell, I found myself drawn to the 3rd floor, to a small room at the end of the hallway that had once belonged to Agnes. It was spartanly furnished. A narrow bed, a writing desk, a wardrobe, but it was what covered the walls that caught my attention. Hundreds of news clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes, all connected by red string like some elaborate crime board. Agnes had been conducting her own investigation into the family curse. I spent hours poring over her research. She had documented every disappearance, noting similarities and discrepancies. She had interviewed townspeople, collected local legends, even consulted with paranormal experts. And she had focused particularly on the woods, the 300 acres that Alistair Vance had purchased all those years ago. According to Agnes's notes, those woods had been sacred to the indigenous people who once lived in the region. They believed it to be a thin place, a location where the boundary between our world and another was permeable. They had erected stone markers to warn people away from certain areas and performed regular rituals to appease what they called the Watchers Between Worlds. When Alistair Vance began clearing the forest for lumber, he had destroyed several of these markers. Within a week, strange phenomena began occurring. Workers reported hearing whistling sounds with no source, seeing impossible shadows, feeling watched by unseen eyes. Then the disappearances started. Not just Samuel Vance, but 3 of the lumbermen's children as well. The most disturbing part of Agnes's research was a series of drawings, childish sketches collected from Vance's children over the decades. Each depicted the same spindly, elongated figures I had seen taking Leo and Clara, the Whistlers, as Clara had called them. At the center of Agnes's crime board was a map of the property with a location deep in the woods marked with a red X. Beside it, a note in Agnes's shaky handwriting, the original stone circle, the doorway. They come through here. A chill ran down my spine as I studied the map. Could this be it? The source of the curse? The reason generations of Vance children had vanished? I was still examining Agnes's research when I heard it. The faint, distant sound of bone chimes carried on the night breeze. My blood froze. It was the same sound that had preceded Leo and Clara's disappearances. Moving to the window, I peered out into the darkness. At the edge of the woods, barely visible in the moonlight, stood a figure, too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at unnatural angles as it raised what appeared to be a hand in greeting. It knew I was here. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I considered fleeing, packing my bags and driving away, leaving Sablewood Hollow and its horrors behind forever. But where would I go? The curse had found my family before, even states away. And now, I was so close to answers. No, I decided, I wouldn't run, not this time. I spent a sleepless night in Agnes's room, surrounded by her research, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. When dawn finally broke, I made my decision. I would follow Agnes's map to the stone circle. I would confront whatever waited there. But first, I needed to understand why I had survived when no other Vance child had. What made me different? I returned to Agnes's crime board, examining it with fresh eyes. Among the photographs and news clippings was a family tree, meticulously detailed with birth dates, death dates, and notes about disappearances. I traced my lineage back through the generations, looking for patterns, for anomalies. And then I saw it, a detail so obvious, I couldn't believe I'd missed it. Every Vance child who had disappeared was a direct blood descendant of Alistair Vance. Every single one. But I wasn't. My hand trembled as I pulled out my phone and opened the photo album. There, among the few family pictures I'd managed to salvage after my parents' deaths, was one taken on my 4th birthday. I zoomed in on my father's face, then looked you up at a portrait of Alistair Vance that hung in the hallway. There was no resemblance, none at all. The truth, I say to the camera, my voice scarcely above a whisper, was both simpler and more devastating than I could have imagined. I wasn't spared because of some special protection or divine intervention. I was spared because I wasn't a Vance by blood. The evidence had been there all along. If only I'd been willing to see it. The arguments I'd overheard between my parents after Leo disappeared, the way my mother couldn't look at me in the months after Clara was taken, the offhand comment from a great uncle at a family reunion, "Doesn't look much like her father, does she?" I wasn't my father's biological daughter. I was the product of an affair, carried into the Vance family under false pretenses. And somehow, whatever took the Vance children, these whistlers, they knew. They could sense the bloodline, or lack thereof. I should have felt relieved. I continue, knowing that I wasn't bound by the curse, that I wasn't marked for disappearance like my siblings. Instead, I felt a strange sense of guilt. Why should I have been spared when they weren't? Why should I live when they were taken? But mixed with the guilt was a newfound determination. If I wasn't at risk, then I could do what no Vance by blood had ever been able to do. I could venture into the woods, find the stone circle, and perhaps discover what had happened to the lost children. I could seek justice, or at least answers. The next morning, armed with Agnes's map, a backpack of supplies, and a steely resolve, I set out into the woods behind the Vance house. The October air was crisp, the forest ablaze with autumn colors. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. I followed a barely there path that wound between ancient trees. The farther I ventured, the older the forest seemed to become. The trees grew larger, their trunks gnarled and twisted. The underbrush thinned, giving way to a carpet of moss that muffled my footsteps. The air grew still, the normal sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, skittering animals, fading into an unnatural silence. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, I reached a small clearing. In its center stood a circle of standing stones, each about 4 feet tall, weathered by centuries of exposure. They weren't impressive like Stonehenge, just simple rough-hewn monoliths arranged in a perfect circle, about 20 feet in diameter. But there was something unsettling about them, an energy that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. I approached cautiously, consulting Agnes's notes. According to her research, the stones had been placed there by the indigenous people as markers, warnings to stay away from what they believed was a doorway between worlds. Alistair Vance had ordered most of the stone circles on his property destroyed, but this one deep in the woods and away from the prime lumber areas had somehow survived. As I stepped closer, I noticed symbols carved into each stone, spirals, concentric circles, strange angular figures that reminded me of the Whistler's elongated forms. At the center of the circle was a flat stone altar, its surface stained dark with what I desperately hoped wasn't blood. I circled the stones, taking photographs, comparing them to Agnes's notes. According to her research, the disappearances were connected to celestial events, specific alignments of stars and planets that created moments when the boundary between worlds grew thin. The next such alignment was, I checked the astronomical chart in Agnes's notes, then looked at my phone's date. Tonight. The next alignment was tonight. A part of me wanted to leave immediately, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this place before nightfall. But a stronger part knew this might be my only chance to understand what had happened to my siblings, to all the Vance children. I decided to wait. As the sun began its descent, I set up a small camp at the edge of the clearing, just outside the stone circle. I had brought food, water, a flashlight, and most importantly, a video camera. Whatever happened tonight, I would document it. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. I reviewed Agnes's notes again and again, looking for anything that might prepare me for what was to come. According to her research, the Whistlers were not ghosts or demons in the traditional sense. They were entities from another dimension, one that occasionally overlapped with our own at specific locations and times. They were drawn to children, specifically Vance children, because of the debt incurred by Alistair Vance when he violated their sacred space and destroyed their markers. A life for a life, a child for each stone destroyed. But the debt should have been paid many times over by now. Why did they continue to take Vance children, generation after generation? The answer, buried in Agnes's most speculative notes, chilled me to the bone. She believed the Whistlers didn't just take the children, they transformed them, made them into something like themselves. And those transformed children, still bearing some memory of their human lives, were the ones who returned to claim their young relatives, perpetuating the cycle of disappearance, which meant that Leo, Clara, and little Arthur might still exist in some form. They might even be the ones to step through the doorway tonight. Darkness fell with unsettling suddenness, as if the night had been waiting impatiently to reclaim the forest. I turned on my flashlight and the video camera, positioning them both to capture the stone circle. Then I waited, every nerve in my body alive with anticipation and dread. The bone chimes came first, that delicate, discordant sound that had haunted my nightmares for decades. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in my bones rather than reaching my ears. Then came the whistling, high-pitched and melodic, like wind through a cracked window, but with a deliberateness that suggested language. It rose and fell in patterns that almost made sense, as if I could understand if I just listened hard enough. The air within the stone circle began to shimmer, much like heat rising from pavement on a summer day. The space between the stones seemed to warp and bend, reality itself becoming malleable. And then, stepping through this distortion, came the Whistlers. 3 of them, their elongated bodies moving with a grace that defied their impossible proportions. I shrank back against a tree, fighting the urge to flee. These were the creatures that had taken my siblings. These were the entities that had cursed my family for generations. And now they were here, mere feet away, separated from me only by the boundary of the stone circle. They moved about the circle, touching the stones with their long, spindly fingers, leaving faint luminescent trails that glowed a sickly green. They seemed to be performing some kind of ritual, their movements deliberate and synchronized. Their whistling grew louder, more complex, building to a crescendo that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. And then they stopped, all at once, and turned toward me. I couldn't see their eyes, just those deep, hollow indentations, but I felt their gaze like a physical weight. For a long moment, we regarded each other across the boundary of the circle, predator and prey, locked in silent confrontation. Then one of them spoke, its lipless mouth barely moving. "Alara," it said, its voice like dry leaves rustling across pavement. "We have been waiting for you." I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, amazed that my voice didn't tremble. "Nothing," it replied. "You are not of the bloodline. You are not ours to take." "But my siblings were," I said, anger flaring through my fear. "Leo, Clara, Arthur, they were innocent children." "As were we," said another of the creatures, its voice higher, almost childlike. With a shock of recognition, I realized it was speaking with Clara's voice. "Before your ancestor broke the covenant, the third whistler stepped forward, and when it spoke, I heard Leo in its otherworldly tones. We are the price of his transgression. The debt must be paid." "But why?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "Why continue this for generations? Hasn't enough been paid?" "The covenant was broken," said the first whistler. "The markers destroyed, the doorway left open. We come through because we must. We take because it is the way." "Then I'll rebuild the markers," I said desperately. "I'll close the doorway. Just give him back, please." The whistlers conferred among themselves, their whistling language incomprehensible to my human ears. Finally, the one with Clara's voice turned back to me. "It is too late for those already taken," it said. "They are as we are now, between worlds, neither here nor there. But the cycle can be broken." "How?" I asked, hope kindling within me. "Tell me how to end this." "Return the sacred items," said the Leo whistler. "Rebuild the markers, seal the doorway." "What sacred items?" I asked, confused. "The stones that were taken," said the first whistler. "The heart of each marker that your ancestor destroyed. He kept them as trophies. They must be returned to their places." I thought of the old Vance house, of its many rooms filled with generations of collected items. Could those stones still be there, somewhere among the family heirlooms? "If I do this," I said carefully, "if I return the stones and rebuild the markers, will you release the children? Will you let them go?" The whistlers were silent for a long moment. Then, in unison, they replied, "We cannot undo what has been done, but no more will be taken. The debt will be paid." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the only one I was going to get. My siblings, all the Vance children, were gone, transformed into these otherworldly entities. But I could stop more from being taken. I could end the curse. "I'll do it," I promised. "I'll find the stones. I'll rebuild the markers." The whistlers nodded in unison, a gesture so human it made my heart ache. Then, one by one, they turned and stepped back through the shimmering air at the center of the circle, disappearing from our reality. All except the one with Clara's voice. She, lingered at the edge of the distortion. "Alara," she said softly, and for a moment, I could almost see my sister beneath the otherworldly form. "It doesn't hurt being this way. We're not suffering, I promise." Then she too was gone, and I was alone in the clearing. The stone circled dark and silent once more. I returned to the Vance house at dawn, exhausted but determined. I had a mission now. Find the sacred stones, rebuild the markers, seal the doorway, and end the curse once and for all. It took me 3 days of searching through the house, opening every drawer, checking every hidden compartment, examining every family heirloom. I found them eventually in a locked chest in the attic, wrapped in velvet cloth and labeled in Alistair Vance's handwriting, "Curiosities from the Indian Circle." There were 7 stones in all, each about the size of my fist, carved with the same symbols I had seen on the standing stones in the forest. They were made of a strange dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Holding them made my skin prickle, as if they emanated some subtle energy. Following Agnes's notes and the instructions from the Whistlers, I spent the next week rebuilding the markers. It was painstaking work, requiring me to locate the remnants of the destroyed stone circles based on old property maps and then reconstruct them using the sacred stones as centerpieces. As I worked, I felt watched, not menacingly, but attentively. Sometimes from the corner of my eye, I would glimpse elongated shadows among the trees, or hear faint whistling on the breeze. The Whistlers were monitoring my progress, ensuring I fulfilled my end of the bargain. Finally, all that remained was to seal the doorway at the original stone circle. According to Agnes's research, this required a ritual to be performed at moonrise on the night of the next alignment, 2 weeks from my encounter with the Whistlers. I prepared carefully, following the instructions in Agnes's notes and my own intuition. When the night arrived, I returned to the stone circle carrying the final sacred stone and the items needed for the ritual: salt, iron filings, sage, and a small vial of my own blood. The forest was eerily silent as I approached the clearing. The stones stood as they had before, ancient sentinels guarding a doorway between worlds. I could feel the energy building as moonrise approached, a tension in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. I began the ritual, sprinkling salt and iron in a precise pattern around the circle, burning sage, and chanting the words Agnes had transcribed from an old indigenous text. As the moon cleared the horizon, bathing the clearing in the silver light, I placed the final sacred stone on the altar at the center of the circle and let 7 drops of my blood fall upon it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone began to glow with an inner light, not the sickly green of the Whistlers, but a warm golden radiance that spread to the other stones in the circle. The air shimmered, much as it had when the Whistlers appeared, but instead of opening wider, the distortion seemed to be closing, like a wound healing. From within this closing doorway came a chorus of whistling, dozens, perhaps hundreds of voices joining together in what could only be described as a song of farewell. And among them, I could swear I heard the laughter of children, of Leo, Clara, and Arthur, saying goodbye. Then the light faded, the whistling silenced, and the forest was still once more. But something had changed. The oppressive energy that had permeated the clearing was gone, replaced by a sense of peace, of completion. The doorway was sealed, the covenant restored, the debt paid. I can't prove what happened in those woods, I say to the camera, my voice steady despite the emotions welling within me. I have the video I recorded, but it shows little more than shadows and strange lights. Nothing that would convince a skeptic. What I do have is this. In the years since I sealed the doorway, not a single child has disappeared from Sablewood Hollow or the surrounding counties. And the nightmares that plagued me for decades have finally stopped. I pick up the faded Polaroid of the 6 Vance children, my siblings, and my cousins, all long gone. I couldn't save them, I admit. I couldn't bring them back. But I could ensure they were the last, that no more children would be taken to pay a debt they never incurred. I looked directly into the camera, my gaze unflinching. The Vance family curse is broken. The Whistlers have returned to their world, and the doorway between our realities is closed. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I swear I can hear distant whistling from the woods. Not menacing, but melancholy. A reminder of what was lost and what was gained. I set down the photograph and glanced toward the window, where twilight is gathering. I still live in the old Vance house. I've renovated it, opened it up to light in life again. And I've started the adoption process. There's a little girl, 8 years old, who needs a home. The social worker was concerned about placing her with me, given my family history. Every child in the Vance family vanished before age 10, she said, except you. A smile touches my lips for the first time. I told her not to worry. The curse is broken. This house will be filled with children's laughter again. Children who will grow up, grow old, live full lives. That's my promise to Leo, Clara, and Arthur. That's how I honor their memory. I reach forward to turn off the camera, but pause, one last thought occurring to me. If you're watching this and you have old, unresolved family stories, unexplained disappearances, generational curses, bargains made by ancestors long dead, don't dismiss them as mere superstition. Some debts must be paid. Some covenants must be honored. Some doors should remain closed. I lean closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. And if you ever find yourself in the woods at twilight and hear a sound like bone chimes on the breeze or high, melodic whistling from between the trees, run. Run and don't look back. Because not all the doorways have been sealed. Not all the whistlers have gone home. The camera goes dark, but the whistling lingers. Soft, distant, and unmistakably inhuman.